So let's look at continuing our supply and demand conversation. We have looked at consumer surplus, the law of demand and supply, how those are graphically depicted on the supply and demand curves, the fact that the y-axis will always be price and x-axis will always be quantity. We also looked at the determinants of both demand and supply. Those determinants are the only things that shift our curves from the right to the left. That's an actual drawing a second parallel line and showing a movement to either the right or the left. Any changes in price of the product will simply move along the graph. Let us continue. So having previously looked at consumer surplus, which is the difference in the price that some consumers were willing to pay in order to simply secure the product in their ownership, versus the price that they pay given market forces and demand and supply, and that's how we get our equilibrium price. So the difference between what some consumers were willing to pay up here versus the market equilibrium price is how we describe our consumer surplus, this triangle here. Producer surplus, on the other hand, is the difference between what producers are willing to receive, the minimum they would accept for the product that they have produced, which is represented with a line above the supply curve, so this area here, up until your market equilibrium, this price over here. And this is the triangle that describes your producer surplus. It measures producer welfare gain, whereas consumer surplus measures consumer welfare gain. Total surplus is both consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. So that is the total surplus within our economy. It is maximized at your market equilibrium, which means that at that point, that if your market equilibrium price is considerably lower than your consumers were willing to pay, that is a major welfare gain for consumers. If, however, the price is slightly higher or moves higher, that would mean an increase in welfare gain for producers. So this represents the total net benefit to society from a market. Because of this, a lot of economists tend to advocate for free markets because the surplus and deficits are often naturally eliminated by the movement of demand and supply. But when you have interventions which impact the pricing of demand and of the demanded and supplied product, that's when you tend to have these surpluses beginning to get out of control in an economy. So there are obviously going to be changes in this market equilibrium. You guys know that we experience this every day. Today we pay 15 Rand 60 for bread, and tomorrow we'll pay 16 Rand 99. Okay, so there are always changes in market equilibrium price and quantities produced. So these cause shifts in demand or supply curves or lead to new equilibrium points. It can result in changes in price or quantity supplied, or even both. So it's important to predict your market outcomes by understanding how these demand and supply curves actually interact. We can actually predict successful advertising campaigns based on market equilibrium. If there is a natural shift in the curve, or if there is a shift, or if there is an increase in price due to the quantity supplied not being sufficient for the demand, then that is a relative measure of whether you've launched a successful advertising campaign or not. So you will be asked to apply these supply and demand laws to various case studies, a lot of real life examples. So we will look at this in more detail in chapters 4 and 5, but the effect of minimum wage laws on the labor market, for example, set a price floor by government. This tends to cause a massive surplus in supply. As we see in our economy in South Africa, we have a lot of unemployment, so there is a massive surplus of individuals or labor. However, because our minimum wage is set quite high above what the market equilibrium would naturally be, it means that fewer jobs or fewer laborers are being demanded by firms. Okay, we also look at the impact of technology advancements on things like book publishing. Technology advancements tend to be very good for consumers. It also reduces prices for producers. So we tend to have shifts to the right when there's a technological improvement. It simply means we can use our existing resources more efficiently to produce more goods at a cheaper price. We also consider the consequences of drought on our agriculture markets, which I'm sure you'll see will pops up in your second assignment. So what happens when there are droughts in an agricultural market? That is a shift in the supply curve to the left. Why? It has caused a problem. There's makes water more expensive. It puts the entire yield of your crop at risk, therefore reducing your ability to supply to the markets, and therefore reducing the profitability, and in the long term actually badly impacting farms. If there is, for example, if the drought causes the price to increase too much, then governments will intervene and set a price limit. Okay, that is a price ceiling above which you cannot charge for those agricultural products. If that happens in the long run, what often tends to happen is that those crops stop becoming viable because they stop becoming profitable. So we will look at government interventions in future chapters. Just to revise our key takeaways, both demand and supply are fundamental to understanding how markets interact. The graphs are a very powerful economic analysis, and they are predominantly based on the relationship between price and quantity and how they emerge in the interaction of the supply and the demand curves. So prices play a crucial part in our market economy because they allow for the allocating of resources to the most efficient areas of our market. Consumer surpluses and producer surpluses measure the benefits of market participation for each of those parties. We use these concepts daily in our economic decisions. It is extremely important to understand how your demand is impacted by price, how the government interventions could impact your market, whether your price is set too high or whether it's set too low, or whether market equilibrium is going to be shifting in the future due to some external determinant. We will in the future be looking at how these markets are shifted by things like complementary and substitute good price increases, or perhaps if they are byproducts and increases production for reasons that we had not anticipated. In other words, things that had nothing to do with price. We look at the government policies and how they affect market outcomes, both intentional and the unintentional consequences of these policies. It is so important to understand these concepts because they will benefit you in the long run when you are making personal financial decisions, that you are looking at the economy while you do so. If there are any other aspects of demand and supply you'd like to explore, please drop me a line, either an email or enter a question into the form that is on ARC, and I will create an entire presentation or video for you. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.